Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today on this episode, I wanted to go ahead and do a video kind of breaking down the progression of summertime bass fishing from post-spawn, right after the spawn, all the way through to the beginnings of fall. When I first started bass fishing, figuring out the seasonal patterns of bass and especially, across the different types of fisheries that you could fish was really a mystery. And it was kind of frustrating to me that I didn't fully understand, the movements of fish throughout the summer, and over the years, there's still a lot of mysteries out there. I feel like as bass fishermen, we're always, trying to, figure everything out to a T with bass, but fish are not they're never going to be fully patternable. Okay. They're always going to be somewhat of a mystery. Okay. But there's a lot of things when it comes to the patterns of the majority of fish in lakes that really allows you to kind of follow, their general movements. Okay. And that helps you kind of prepare different presentations for those different situations, those different times of the year. So I wanted to start by going over here to the whiteboard and talking about this chunk of time, this part of the calendar right here, May to September. That to me, it really marks the full summertime experience, bass fishing. Of course, May is still spring, that's still spring, but what happens in May really does fit into what happens in June and July. And then September, you can consider September the beginning of fall, but to me, it's still the dog days of summer. So let's start off with May. So May is one of my favorite months for bass fishing. And it is a time period where a lot of fish are still up shallow spawning. Depending on where you're at in the country, there's still maybe a ton of fish spawning, maybe the primary spawn month, especially if you go up north. And May is also a good post-spawn time period. So during the month of May, once those fish leave the beds, they want to feed up. Once they're done with the spawning process, they want to get out there offshore on main lake areas and start feeding a lot. So they start chasing around, whatever type of bait fish is prevalent in the fisheries that you're looking at. Up north, it's probably like perch or, small bluegill, alewife, things like that. Down south, it's primarily threadfin shad and sometimes with certain lakes, blueback herring, that sort of thing. So May is a key part of the summertime patterns because that's when they first move out to those offshore areas. On Lake Chickamauga, for instance, May is like one of the best months because there hasn't been any pressure out there on the ledges. And if you can be one of the first people that finds a school that's just getting out to the ledges, it can be absolute dynamite. Going into June, June is primarily offshore, summertime pattern. Like if it's June, I'm out there, graphing around looking for the best offshore structure. This is the month of June is, especially on lakes like Chickamauga or the Tennessee River in general, June is like the best month for offshore fishing. That's when the schools are their biggest, they're the hungriest, they're the most likely to bite. It's also, the month where everybody's out there fishing because the weather's really nice. So they do start getting a lot of pressure, but they haven't been pressured for so long that they're really difficult to bite. You can use a lot of good reaction style techniques such as like spoons, deep diving crankbaits, swim baits, things like that. So the fish are really aggressive in June. They're very prevalent offshore. And by the way, throughout all of this time period, you can still fish shallow. So don't think that you have to go deep. But the most dramatic migrations or transitions that the bass go through during the summer happen deep. Okay, that's where they're moving around a lot more. Shallow, they stay pretty consistent. Bass are always going to be shallow. Some bass are always going to be shallow. And we're going to kind of get into when I like to fish shallow most during the summertime. July is a month where those fish are still offshore. They're still on those offshore ledges and offshore spots, but they've seen a lot of pressure. They started, anglers started really catching them at the end of May, all throughout June. And in July, those fish start to really get lockjaw, okay? The days are starting to get hotter. There's going to be less rain, which is going to mean less current and less flow. And so finesse style baits in July start working best. So, you go from fishing those reaction baits that are so much fun to catch the bass on, throwing swim baits, those spoons, the deep diving crankbaits, and you really start seeing those fish avoid those baits because they've seen so many of them. And things like drop shots, Nico rigs, Ned rigs, even Carolina rigs, those baits that you can work slower start working better. And so July, still offshore, but you have to kind of be a little bit more finessey and slow down a little bit. Once you get into August, the end of July and into August, really that's where a big shift happens. So I see it every single year. The fish that were like heavy out on the ledges during end of May, June, and the beginning of July, they're starting to break up. They're so tired of getting caught that they just start breaking off into little groups, and a lot of them start moving shallow. So August is a time period where I really like to start focusing my efforts in shallow areas. It may be main lake areas. Maybe there's some main lake docks or something like that, a main lake flat, or just a little pocket on the main lake. Whatever type of cover you can find up shallow can be very good. So August is a time period where I really start focusing my efforts back up shallow. Another thing that happens during the July and August time period is that it's been really hot. Not a lot of water flow in a lot of these lakes because not a lot of rain. And what happens is thermoclines start to develop. And a thermocline is essentially the separation. It's like this little layer where there's a dramatic change in oxygen level and temperature level and just the overall fertility of the water. The upper part of the water column is called the epilymnion, probably mispronouncing that. And that is essentially warmer water. It's full of oxygen. And then you start getting into this little, slice of the water column that you can see on your electronics. Like I can see it on my Lowrance 2D very, very well sometimes, where you have this like band in the middle of the water column. That is that transition, that very dramatic transition from that oxygen-rich, warmer water and the cold oxygen, very low oxygen dissolved content or dissolved oxygen content of the hypolymnion. Okay, so really what that means is the deeper water, when you start seeing that thermocline, the fish are going to be at or above that thermocline. Okay, so that's a reason why late July and August fish start being shallow more, is because that's where the oxygen content is suitable for living. So that's another reason why I like fishing shallow, just looking for shade and places that you would want to be sitting if you were a bass and you couldn't go deep. And then let's get into September. September is a sneaky month. Okay, it still feels hot during the day. Sometimes it's in the 90s. The water temperature is still hot, but you start getting those cooler nights. And if you're not paying attention, you may miss some of the trees start turning this time of year. They start turning colors. Maybe not dramatically. It's not October yet, October, November, but they do start changing colors. And that's because the days start getting shorter. You start having cooler nights. And even if you're not noticing it, the fish are. And especially down south, the fall shad migration really starts in September. A lot of people think it starts in October, But September is a really good time period to start going into the backs of the creeks. Once you start feeling those cooler nights, that's where those fish are going to hang out, is where those shad are making their way into the backs of the creeks. So September is a really good month to fish shallow as well. To me, once I get into August and September, it's all about shallow power fishing for me. Unless you're like a scoper, then scoping seems to be pretty resistant to seasonal patterns. There's always fish out deep where people can scope them. But for guys like me that like power fishing, throwing chatterbaits, swim jigs, ploppers, buzz baits, all that stuff, August, September, but primarily September is a really, really good month for that. And on some lakes like Chickamauga or Gunnersville, September's the month where the frog bite starts turning on. It's not at its hottest. October, November is the best time period for frog fishing over mats, but it does start turning on. So anyways, guys, that was a lot of rambling about the summertime seasonal patterns, but hopefully this kind of helps you understand what the fish are going through. Every single lake's different. Every single year is different. And every single May through September is different. So really, even though you may have this information at the ready, make sure you're aware of what's happening on your lake right now. So anyways, guys, make sure that you consider hitting that subscribe button, liking and sharing this content if you enjoy this video. Other than that, I'm going to see you out on the water. Make sure you trust the process.